Muy buenas tardes, nos encontramos nuevamente en Futurecom 2012, reportando desde Río de Janeiro, y nos encontramos en el stand de Imperva, que es una empresa que se dedica a prevenir delitos de abuso de los usuarios y prevenir intervenciones de hackers. Vamos a hablar sobre la seguridad, vamos a hablar sobre la industria de la seguridad, y se encuentra con nosotros el señor Rob Rachwald, que es el director de estrategia de seguridad de Imperva. Thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Could you tell us, what is Imperva, and what generally does Imperva?
Imperva is a data security company. What we try to do is protect the data, starting with a database, because right now the most important thing that hackers want is your data, because it has value on the black market, it has value to other hackers. So this is the first thing that we do. So we protect databases, and then data moves from databases into web applications. So we also have a web application firewall that will protect from basic web application attacks. In 2011, 83% of hacks were targeted at web applications, and it's because most people don't protect them properly, and that's one of the key things that we do. And then lastly, we also try to protect sensitive documents, like things sitting in a SharePoint instance, for example. So we have a file protection system as well.
How can you give us an example of how did you protect, or how the users, the common users, can protect the data?
Well, it really boils down to having a very secure website and having a very secure database and having the proper protections around it. So, for example, today when hackers attack a website, they do something very simple. It's called a SQL injection. It's a very simple, common tool or method that will try to extract data from a web application. It is the main way anonymous attacks, it is the main way private attackers attack, and it's something that we very easily recognize, and that's something that we can easily block. So that's really one of the key things to do. If you are concerned about insiders, if you're concerned about somebody who works in your company doing something bad, then really what you need to do is understand how people normally interact with data and just spot any changes in how they're extracting data. So for example, most users will take data on a Monday or Tuesday, maybe take 20 or 30 different data records, but then suddenly on Friday they take 50,000. That's unusual. Those are the kinds of things that you need to be able to identify.
What are your major customers that you have in Latin America to protect the data?
Today in Latin America we protect mostly banks, and e-commerce companies. Those are the two biggest types of industries that we protect. And it makes sense because they have a lot of data, they have money to protect as well, so they're in the biggest need of our solutions.
As an example, how can you explain to the audience, what are the standard procedure of attack, for example, the Anonymous? How does Anonymous work in these attack procedures?
That's an excellent question, because not only are you going to answer the question how Anonymous attacks, but they attack in a very similar way to other hackers as well. So step one is find a vulnerability in your website. So they're looking for usually 3 or 4 different types of vulnerabilities, and once they find those vulnerabilities, they'll try to exploit it and then pull the data out. And that's very typical of both private and hacktivists, so Anonymous. The second step the hacktivists will do is, if they can't take your data, what they will do is something called the denial of service, also known as a DDoS. And so they try to hit your website so many times that it doesn't work. But what a lot of people don't realize is that Anonymous has actually started to do something called application DDoS. So they focus not on the network, but rather on the application itself. And so, for example, one Anonymous attack that we witnessed, what they did is they used the search engine functionality to search constantly the same very common term, and that way what you did is you froze the computers in the back end to try to bring the website down. And this is something that a lot of companies aren't prepared for today, and they should be.
How do you intervene in this procedure? When is the best time for you to intervene?
Well, I'm a big believer in proactive security, so everybody will be hacked. There's two kinds of companies today. Companies that have been hacked and companies that don't know that they've been hacked. So it's my belief that you should be very proactive, and the first thing you need to do is actually start with the applications and start to secure those applications. Most companies today already have firewalls, antivirus, and intrusion detection systems, but they don't really defend against some of the most common and simple types of attacks that anonymous hackers and private hackers conduct today.
Okay, and how can you explain to the audience, how these applications can be produced in a massive way?
How the applications can be?
Can be used in a massive way. That every user can have this kind of application.
Well, it's a matter of identifying which users are probably bad and which users are probably good. And you really want to profile what a normal usage looks like. So, for example, hackers typically come from anonymization services on the web. And so you know that if somebody comes from one of those types of services, that they're probably going to do something wrong. Also, they go through very special routers called onion routers that masks their identity. But you can identify where they're coming from, and usually, a lot of banks, they just get rid of that traffic immediately. And so that makes the usage better for the good customers, for the good users. What it means is the website works faster, and you don't have to worry so much about fraud and your data being taken.
How do the hackers work in the social networks like Facebook, Twitter?
It's a good question. Actually, we just completed a study about how hackers are approaching Facebook and Twitter. And they're using it increasingly for two things. One, they're using it for social engineering. So they're using it as a way to defraud people, get their credentials, and then also using it to spread malware. The other thing they're trying to do is identify where people work and what their interests are so that they can send them a very specific email called spear phishing to have them click on it and then deploy malware. So Facebook in particular and Twitter as well are two really, really growing areas in the world of hacking today.
What would you recommend as a professional, of security professional, to a teenager, to the young users of the social networks to prevent this kind of intervention? Sure.
It's a good question. And of course, my first answer nobody will listen to, but I'm going to say it anyways. Don't use social networks. But if you have to, don't use it. It's kind of funny, but you shouldn't use your real identity. So don't use your might use your first name, but maybe change your last name. So make it very, very difficult to identify who you are on a social network. So what you should be doing, instead of being open about trying to open up your life and violate your privacy, what you really should do is proceed in a way that really tries to protect your privacy and protects who you are and keep yourself anonymous on these social networks. And that's really the best thing to do. And then second, you really need to understand how the bad guys operate and be careful when you click on links and things like that. So really understanding what hackers are doing on these social networks is important so that you don't fall into their trap.
Is there any kind of application that can be used in social networks?
No, right now, there's nothing Imperva can do other than, if somebody is infected because of a social network, what we can probably do is detect if some malware is accessing data in a very irregular fashion. And that's typically the way we try to catch those types of things, because antivirus today simply doesn't work. Antivirus is not very effective anymore. It catches, less than 20% of viruses on average.
How's your research works doing? For next years, you have a strategic plan in research and to improve the way that the bad guys do? Yeah.
So your question is a good one, because hackers are by definition innovators and early adopters. And so in order to stay on top of what they're doing, you really have to research several things. So first of all, you have to research tools and technologies, because they're constantly developing new tools to attack people. They're constantly developing new technologies to try to extract data. We've seen in just the last year a new tool that is so effective at pulling data out of websites, it's really completely changed how hacking can work, because now a 12-year-old kid can very simply learn these tools and start hacking. So there's the technology part. The second thing you have to do is understand how they make money. So if you know where the revenue comes from, then you can identify ways to help companies block those revenue streams. And also you can help law enforcement identify how to block those revenue streams. So we really research on hackers and their tools and their business models.
How did you know that the hackers hasn't interviewed Imperva?
How do I know hackers haven't interviewed Imperva? Well, it's funny because we do research on hackers, and every so often I get emails from hackers, I get phone calls sometimes even from hackers. I got a phone call from one of the anonymous hackers at one point. So, you deal with it and you interact with them. It's interesting sometimes, but it's part of what you do.